The news of yet another loss in the world of rock music emerged today. Jim Morrison, age 27, the iconic lead singer of The Doors. According to the first official police report, he was discovered unconscious inside a Paris nightclub bathroom, with a visible powder-like substance on his clothing. That initial account formed the earliest understanding of what happened. However, by the next morning, a second and conflicting report appeared, stating instead that Morrison had died in the bathtub of his private home. Soon after, the original report mysteriously vanished from records. No autopsy was performed. His passport disappeared without explanation. None of his bandmates were ever permitted to see his body. For more than 5 decades, 54 years, no definitive explanation was ever provided for his death. Later, an internal memo surfaced that changed the entire direction of the case. It confirmed that Morrison's body had been moved after death, and that the death scene had been deliberately arranged. Individuals who had been involved in the concealment eventually began to speak out. Jim Morrison entered the world on December 8, 1943, in Melbourne, Florida. From the very beginning, there seemed to be an unusual intensity surrounding his life. His parents had lived through the Pearl Harbor attack 2 years before his birth, and that traumatic historical memory lingered in the household like an unspoken presence. It was never openly discussed, but it shaped the emotional atmosphere of his upbringing. His childhood unfolded under strict military discipline because his father, Rear Admiral George Stephen Morrison, was constantly reassigned to different naval bases. Every relocation meant a completely new environment. New towns, new schools, new expectations, and new social worlds to navigate. By the time Jim reached adolescence, he had attended at least 13 different schools in just 15 years. This constant displacement left him feeling rootless and disconnected. Despite the instability, he demonstrated strong academic ability. His IQ was measured at 149, and his grades averaged around 88. Yet intelligence did not shield him from emotional distance at home. A quiet tension existed within the family, and that unspoken atmosphere contributed to a growing sense of restlessness inside him. This internal unease deepened dramatically when he was 4 years old. In July 1947, while traveling through the New Mexico desert, the Morrison family allegedly came upon a serious accident along Route 66. Jim later described a disturbing scene in which injured or deceased Native American workers were lying on the roadside. The image, according to his recollection, had a profound psychological impact on him. He claimed that in that moment he experienced something supernatural, believing the spirit of an elderly Native American man entered his own body. He recalled the overwhelming heat, the smell of sand mixed with blood, and the haunting stillness that followed the sight. His father, however, strongly denied that the family had ever been in that area or witnessed such an event. Despite this denial, Jim held onto the memory with remarkable clarity, insisting it was real. This contradiction between his memory and his father's version of events created a deep psychological divide. Over time, this experience became part of Morrison's personal mythology and later influenced his creative work, including references that would appear in songs like Peace Frog and Dawn's Highway. Music. As his father's military career continued, the family moved repeatedly across the United States. They lived in Florida, San Diego, Fairfax County in Virginia, Kingsville in Texas, Albuquerque in New Mexico, returned again to San Diego, and eventually settled in Alameda, California in 1958. Each move forced Jim to reinvent his social identity from scratch. As a result, he became more observant, quieter, and increasingly introspective. Books became his refuge. He developed the belief that stability was an illusion and that change was the only constant in life. This mindset drew him toward poetry and philosophy, where ideas about existence, identity, and rebellion resonated deeply with him. Although he was intellectually gifted, his emotional needs were often ignored, which contributed to a growing internal resistance against authority and expectation. At the same time, another major historical influence was unfolding in his family life. His father played a role during the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964. On August 2nd, the USS Maddox reported being attacked, and 2 days later additional radar signals suggested further activity. Admiral Morrison and his team believed that the second reported attack may not have actually occurred and attempted to warn higher command. However, their concerns were not passed on to President Lyndon B. Johnson. Instead, the incident was used to justify the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which significantly expanded U.S. military involvement in the Vietnam War. Jim watched as the country moved toward war through the same system his father served. At the same time, young men of his generation were being drafted into a conflict he would later reject. This created a painful contradiction within him. His father connected to the machinery of war, while he would eventually become a cultural symbol of rebellion against it. As a teenager, Jim's defiance became increasingly visible. He frequently lied to teachers and broke rules with ease, sometimes appearing to enjoy the act of defiance itself. His sister recalled an incident where he left class by claiming he needed brain tumor surgery, simply because he did not want to remain in school. He began drinking more heavily and actively pursuing intense, unconventional experiences. For his graduation gift, he requested the complete works of Nietzsche, revealing his growing fascination with philosophy and existential thought. At the age of 15, in 1958, he began skipping classes at Alameda High School to explore San Francisco's underground beatnik culture. He visited City Lights bookstore, founded by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, where he encountered the works of writers such as Jack Kerouac and William S. Burroughs. The experience was electrifying for him. He spent long hours immersed in books that challenged traditional values and questioned authority. The cafes, streets, and intellectual atmosphere of the Beat generation reshaped his thinking, and he returned to school carrying ideas that unsettled his previous worldview. In 1959, the family moved again, this time to Alexandria, Virginia. Jim attended George Washington High School, where he maintained strong academic performance, but became increasingly rebellious in behavior. He spent time near the waterfront, reading poetry that made him feel both powerful and isolated. To his peers, he appeared intense, distant, and difficult to fully understand. He graduated in June 1961 with a large personal library and a strong belief that his future lay far beyond conventional expectations. In 1964, he enrolled in the UCLA School of Film. This decision went against his father's wishes, but Jim committed himself fully to the creative environment. There, he studied under professors who introduced him to experimental and unconventional artistic ideas. The influence of Antonin Artaud had a particularly strong impact on his early writing style. During this period, he lived in poverty, cut ties with his family, and immersed himself in film and poetry while struggling to remain grounded in everyday reality. His graduation film, screened on June 14, 1965 at Melnitz Hall, contained disturbing imagery including burned film frames, screams, and scenes associated with death. The audience watched in silence. A professor stopped the screening midway and declared the film unsuitable for public viewing, ordering all copies destroyed. Jim received a failing grade and left the screening feeling humiliated and exposed. Instead of silencing him, however, the rejection pushed him further away from mainstream paths. Afterward, he drifted through poetry and the fringes of Los Angeles. He lived on the rooftop of his friend Dennis Jacobs' apartment in Venice Beach. The sky became his roof, and the ocean became his daily routine. He survived on canned beans and LSD, constantly carrying Edith Hamilton's mythology and writing poetry that would later evolve into early lyrics for the Doors. This period stripped him down creatively and emotionally, preparing him for transformation. On July 8, 1965, around 1 p.m., he walked along Venice Beach toward Lifeguard Tower 25, where Ray Manzarek was sitting in meditation on the sand. Jim had been searching for him for days. When they finally met, Jim appeared exhausted and thin, still affected by his rooftop lifestyle. Water dripped from his hair as the conversation began. Ray asked what he had been doing, and Jim replied that he had been writing songs. Then, right there on the beach, he performed the opening lines of Moonlight Drive, followed by My Eyes Have Seen You. Ray was stunned and immediately told him those were the best songs he had ever heard. He suggested forming a band. That moment marked the beginning of the Doors. Ray soon contacted John Densmore and Robbie Krieger. Their first rehearsal followed shortly after, and by September 1965, they recorded a demo. Their sound was unusual, atmospheric, and unlike anything in mainstream music at the time. By August 1966, the Doors were performing regularly at venues like the Whiskey, A Go-Go, and the London Fog, slowly building a reputation. Arthur Lee of the band Love recommended them to Elektra Records president Jack Halsman, who attended a live performance alongside producer Paul Rothchild. Impressed by what he saw, Elektra signed the band on August 18, 1966, offering a 7-album contract despite their lack of commercial polish. Their debut album, released on January 4, 1967, made an immediate impact. Songs such as Break On Through, The End, and Alabama Song propelled it to number 2 on the Billboard 200 in September 1967, held back only by the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The album remained on the charts for 121 weeks. In 2015, it was added to the National Recording Registry for its groundbreaking blend of musical styles. The single Light My Fire, written by Robbie Krieger, was released in edited form on April 24, 1967. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July and stayed there for 3 weeks. It earned gold certification with over 1 million copies sold and later achieved double platinum status with over 2 million sales. It was voted the number 1 song of 1967 by American Bandstand dancers and ranked number 7 on Billboard's year-end list. As fame expanded, Morrison began developing a striking persona influenced by psychedelic experiences. While under LSD, he visualized lizards moving across surfaces. During the recording of Not to Touch the Earth, he suddenly shouted, "I am the Lizard King. I can do anything." That phrase became permanently associated with his identity. The band's second album, Strange Days, released on September 25, 1967, introduced experimental elements, such as the Moog synthesizer. Songs like People Are Strange, Love Me Two Times, and When the Music's Over expanded their artistic range. It reached number 3 on the Billboard 200 and later achieved platinum status. Music. Their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show on September 17, 1967, was watched by approximately 10 million viewers. CBS executives demanded that Morrison change the lyric "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," but during the live broadcast, he sang it unchanged. Afterward, Ed Sullivan declared the band would never appear on his show again, while Morrison famously replied that they had already performed. On December 9, 1967, in New Haven, Morrison was arrested during a live performance after being sprayed with mace by police backstage. On stage, he insulted officers and the audience, leading to charges of breach of peace and inciting a riot. It became the first instance of a rock musician being arrested on stage, shocking the music world. Around this time, his relationship with Pamela Courson became central to his life. They met in 1966 at the London Fog while she studied art. By 1967, they were living together in Los Angeles. Their relationship was intense, artistic, and unstable. In December 1967, Pamela obtained a marriage license, but it was never filed or notarized. Despite instability, Morrison gave her control over his finances and later supported her boutique, Femis, in 1969, which attracted figures like Sharon Tate and Miles Davis. However, addiction, jealousy, and constant conflict strained their bond. By 1971, they moved to Paris seeking escape, but their difficulties followed them. Morrison's health declined sharply, and on July 3, 1971, Pamela found him dead in their Paris apartment from a suspected heroin overdose. The Miami concert on March 1, 1969, became one of the most infamous moments of his career. The Dinner Key Auditorium was overcrowded with roughly 12,000 people and lacked air conditioning, creating suffocating conditions. Morrison arrived late after heavy drinking and began insulting the audience, calling them idiots and slaves. The performance spiraled into chaos. The band, unaware of the fallout, left for Jamaica the following morning. Later, Morrison was charged with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. His trial began on August 20, 1970, and lasted 16 days. He was convicted of 2 misdemeanors, indecent exposure, and profanity. On October 30, 1970, he received a sentence of 6 months in jail and a $500 fine, though he remained free on appeal and never served jail time. However, venues increasingly refused to book the Doors. Despite this decline, the band recorded Morrison Hotel, released in February 1970, returning to a raw blues sound recorded between November 1969 and January 1970. Later, L.A. Woman, recorded between November 1970 and January 1971 in a stripped-down setup, became Morrison's final studio album with the band. By December 12, 1970, during a New Orleans performance, Morrison appeared visibly broken down. He smashed his microphone into the stage and walked off without returning. The tour was canceled shortly afterward. His final years were marked by severe alcohol abuse, reportedly consuming up to 4/5 of bourbon daily, around 1.5 liters, along with heavy beer intake. Friends claimed he could drink up to 36 beers in a single day while eating very little. His health deteriorated rapidly, and his weight increased significantly. He had also recorded spoken word material titled An American Prayer in 1969 and 1970, which was later released in 1978 with music added by surviving band members, earning a Grammy nomination. In March 1971, Morrison moved to Paris with Pamela Corson, hoping for privacy and recovery. He lived quietly, walking through cafes and cemeteries, but heroin use spread through the local scene, and both became entangled in addiction. On July 3, 1971, conflicting reports emerged again. Some claimed Morrison died in a nightclub called the Rock and Roll Circus after being found unconscious in a bathroom. Others stated he died in his bathtub at home. Club owner Sam Burnett claimed his body was removed before authorities arrived. In 2014, Marianne Faithfull stated that dealer Gene DeBerturi supplied the heroin responsible for Morrison's death, possibly an accidental overdose due to extreme potency. DeBerturi later fled and died in Morocco. French police files declassified in 2025 confirmed that Morrison was found unconscious around 3 a.m. in a nightclub bathroom with powder on his clothing and clear signs of overdose. He was removed at approximately 3:15 a.m. before any medical examination could take place. A second report then listed his death as occurring at home from heart failure, with no autopsy performed despite legal requirements. His passport disappeared, and his funeral was rushed with no attendance from family or bandmates. An internal memo dated July 5, 1971 later confirmed that the body had been moved and the scene relocated before officials arrived, reinforcing the conclusion that the death location had been staged and the official narrative altered to avoid scrutiny.